A street thug thought he could intimidate a royal guard with threats, and a spat on him. But one precise strike later, he was on the ground spitting out his own teeth. Here's how it happened. But before we continue, let us know in the comments below where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe if you like our content. The crisp morning air in front of Buckingham Palace, usually a festive hum of tourist chatter and the rhythmic clip-clop of horses' hooves, held a strange tension. Thomas, a royal guard, stood ramrod straight in his scarlet uniform and towering bearskin hat. He'd been doing this for 5 years now, and while the pomp and circumstance were part of the job, sometimes it felt a little robotic. He'd learned to tune out the noise, the pointing cameras, the whispered comments. His blue eyes, usually fixed on the horizon, narrowed slightly as a hulking figure swaggered into his personal space. This was John, a brute of a fellow with a scarred cheek and the swagger of someone used to getting his way. He reeked of cheap ale and trouble, the kind of guy Thomas instinctively knew to avoid. His gut clenched. John stopped a few feet away, leering at Thomas. He muttered something crude to his companion, who snickered. Thomas's jaw tightened. He knew what was coming. These types were always looking for a reaction, a crack in the stoic facade. Without warning, John spat a thick gob of phlegm onto Thomas's gloved hand. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Thomas's stomach churned. Years of training told him to remain impassive, to be the stoic symbol of the crown. But beneath the stoicism, a flash of anger, hot and sharp, flared. Couldn't this guy just not? He imagined the headlines, "Royal Guard breaks protocol, attacks tourist." The thought made his stomach churn even more. He was trapped. Suddenly, a figure detached itself from the throng of onlookers. It was Arthur, an old veteran in a faded uniform that spoke of a lifetime of service. His face, a roadmap of wrinkles etched by time and hardship, was set in a grim line. He moved with surprising swiftness, pushing his way through the crowd. Thomas recognized the set of his jaw, the quiet determination in his eyes. He'd seen that look before, in old comrades, men who'd seen too much. A flicker of hope, unexpected and unwelcome, sparked within him. Arthur stopped before John, his steely gray eyes boring into the bullies. Arthur looked frail, almost insignificant compared to the larger man, but there was an undeniable fire in his gaze. "You disgust me," he rasped, his voice surprisingly strong, cutting through the murmuring crowd. "Have you no respect?" John sneered. "Respect? For what? A fancy, toy soldier?" He gestured mockingly at Thomas, who clenched his fists inside his gloves. He wanted to tell this guy exactly what he thought of him, the simmering rage threatening to boil over. But he knew he couldn't. His duty, his uniform, held him captive. Without another word, Arthur drew back his hand and slapped John across the face. The sound echoed through the square, sharp and decisive. John staggered back, his eyes wide with shock. He'd clearly expected no resistance from the old man. The crowd gasped again, this time with a mixture of shock and something akin to approval. Before John could retaliate, Arthur stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. "You think you're tough, eh? You think you're clever picking on someone who can't fight back? I've seen things, son. Things that would turn your stomach. I've faced enemies who would make you cry for your mother. And you're just a coward." John, for all his bluster, seemed to deflate under Arthur's intense gaze. He mumbled something incoherent and, to everyone's surprise, turned and slunk away, disappearing into the crowd. The tension that had gripped the square began to dissipate. A collective sigh of relief swept through the onlookers. Thomas, still motionless, subtly inclined his head towards Arthur in a silent gesture of gratitude. "Thank you," he thought. "Thank you for doing what I couldn't." A wave of emotion washed over him, relief, gratitude, and a strange sense of shame that he hadn't been able to act himself. Arthur, his adrenaline fading, suddenly looked his age. He swayed slightly, and Thomas, finally breaking his rigid stance, took a small step forward, as if to offer support. He was genuinely worried about the old man. He'd seen that kind of fire before, the kind that burns bright and then leaves ashes. Just then, a little girl, no more than 5 years old, with bright, curious eyes, detached herself from the crowd. She clutched a single perfect red rose in her hand. She approached Arthur hesitantly and offered him the flower. "For you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You were brave." Arthur's weathered face softened. He knelt down, his joints creaking, and accepted the rose. A genuine smile touched his lips, a rare sight indeed. "Thank you, little one," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're very kind." He looked at the rose, then back at Thomas, who had resumed his post. The tension in the air had completely dissipated, replaced by a sense of quiet admiration for the old soldier who, in a moment of unexpected courage, had defended not just a symbol of royalty, but the very idea of respect and decency. The little girl's simple act of kindness, the offering of the rose, was a perfect punctuation mark on the scene, a reminder that even in the face of ugliness, beauty and goodness could still prevail. Thomas straightened his shoulders, a renewed sense of pride filling him. He was a royal guard, and he'd been reminded, in the most unexpected way, what that truly meant. The moral of the story is that courage comes in many forms. It can be the quiet strength of a soldier bound by duty, the fiery defiance of an old veteran defending what's right, or the simple innocence of a child offering a flower. It reminds us that even in the face of indifference or fear, one person can make a difference, and that kindness and respect are values worth fighting for. And as the sun climbed higher over Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows across the square, it seemed to whisper a final, hopeful message. Never underestimate the power of a single act of bravery or a single gesture of love. What do you think about it? Leave a comment below about your point of views about it. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. And don't forget to hit that notification bell for more captivating content. See you in the next one.